Good morning. Good snowy morning. You say not yet, but it's coming, I guess. Shoot, man, you hear from anywhere from 3 to 5 to 10 to 18, so I don't know what we're going to get. I particularly don't care for either one of them. Snow, I've had enough of that. Hey, but we're all here this morning. So let me ask you a question. How many of you here have ever read and studied the Old Testament book of Malachi? You read? Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, well, a lot of us have read some of the Old Testament. You know, some people, Christians, some Christians don't think Old Testament, that's not needed. We're in a modern day world. You know, we don't need the Old Testament. They say the Old Testament is full of law and judgment. And the New Testament is full of what? Grace and forgiveness and love. And that's what a lot of preachers teach today. Now, if you listen to a lot of preachers, I mean, I don't, but I have in the past, but if you listen to a lot of TV preachers, you don't hear much about sin and judgment, clean living, holy living. You don't hear much about that. And some Christians don't think that's important. You know, just so I love God and just so I go to church. But we're going to look at the Old Testament. We're going to look at Malachi for the next couple of weeks. We're going to look at the Old Testament, and we're going to see just how relevant the Old Testament is to today's Christian, and just see how relevant it is to today's society. You know, when you read the Old Testament, you find out that there's not a whole lot of difference between people back in that day and there is nowadays. Not a whole lot of difference. But we're going to look at Malachi next couple of weeks, and we're going to see what the Old Testament has to say to those people back in that day. That was Malachi probably close to 400 years before Christ came into the world. Malachi prophesied the book of Malachi. And we're going to look at that and see just what he has to say to us today also. That's what we want. That's why you read the Bible anyway, right? You read and you study and you see the history of the older people, the Old Testament people, and you see how they at that time compare to us today, and you see how God handled those people, and you can expect God's unchanging, right? I mean, he's the same yesterday as he is today, or today as he was yesterday. And he took care of disobedience back in that day, and he's going to take care of disobedience in today's world. Believe me, he is. Some people say, where's God at in all of this? Well, he has a timetable. And we can't rush him. It's on that's what that term the Bible used, in the fullness of time. When God gets ready, when God thinks it's ready, then he'll act. But Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, one of the 17 books of the prophetic area of the Old Testament. You know, there's about 17 books there in the Old Testament right at the very end of the Old Testament, 17 different books, and they're called the prophetic books, and it's divided up. There's 17 books there, but there's only 16 writers, 16 prophets, because one of the prophets, one of those 16 prophets, wrote 2 of the books. Anybody take a wild guess? What prophet of the Old Testament wrote 2 of the books of the prophetic division of the Old Testament? Jeremiah. He wrote Jeremiah, and then he wrote the book of Lamentations. That's all part of that right there. Did you know that that section of 17 books, prophetic books, divided up into two categories? You have, this is not the lesson, this is just a little bit of background and stuff to get everybody in the mood, in the right frame of mind. But those 17 books are divided up into 2 different divisions: major prophets, minor prophets. You ever think about why they were called that? I mean, a prophet of God is an important person. I mean, he's got something to say from God to the people. So why do say, well, this is a major prophet here, but this is a minor prophet? They're prophets in God's eyes, and he's appointed them that, and he's given them messages to give their people. But what we have done, human beings, what we have done is we divided it up. And we say, this is a major prophet, this is a minor prophet, and the only reason is we say this is a major prophet because his book is bigger than this one's over here. So we've got to divide it up. Like, for instance, Isaiah. 66 chapters in Isaiah. Oh, by the way, how many books in the Bible? 66, yeah. Hey, Isaiah's got 66 books in the 66 chapters in his book, so he's a major prophet. He has a lot to say. Job, how many chapters in Job? 3. He doesn't have quite as much, it doesn't take him as long, as many chapters to say what he has to say. So he's a minor prophet. Both messages are important. It's just that Isaiah has a whole lot more to say than Joel did. So Isaiah is a major prophet, and Joel is a minor prophet. And another thing, too, about the prophetic books, Malachi is the last prophet. He's the last book of the Old Testament, but he's the last prophet that has anything to say to the nation Israel until about 400 years later, Christ is born, the prophet of all prophets. And so Bible scholars and people, they say God was silent for 400 years. By the way, what's in that 400 years there? The captivity where they were slaves in Israel for about 400 years, and then Christ comes on the scene. We get the first glimpse of him in the book of Matthew, and then now God is speaking personally through Jesus Christ. God himself is there speaking to us. He doesn't need prophets. He's there. So anyway, that's a little bit of that. A little bit of Bible history or Bible knowledge that you may find interesting. Okay, so that's enough for that. Turn to the book of Malachi, and we're going to look at several different passages there in Malachi. And we're going to find out, why is this book important to us? I mean, after all, 2,500 years old. I mean, why is it, what relevancy does it have today for us? I mean, we're modern. You know, we don't ride donkeys and horses and drive little carts around. I mean, we got automobiles and planes and trains. What does a guy who lived like that has to say to us today? We're going to find out. His message. Remember, a prophet is appointed by God, and God gives him a message and to take to God's people, to take to the world. And Malachi has been appointed. He's got a message for God's people. And the same message as in that day is the same message preachers need to be preaching today. Now look, in the book of Malachi, we're going to find a warning. We're going to find a warning to unbelievers. You say, yeah, those unbelievers, they need to be warned. Well, wait a minute. We also have a warning to believers. You say, wait a minute now. What are we going to be warned about? Well, we're going to find out here in a little bit. And then we're going to see that there's going to be a coming judgment on the whole world. You know, you say, yeah, boy, them people, they need to be judged. But not me. I mean, I don't have any sin. You know? Yeah, the world needs to be judged. It's full of sin and wickedness. Yeah, but not me. I don't have any sin. I had that happen to me one time. I'm knocking on doors and visiting with somebody, and we were talking to them. He was an unbeliever, and I was trying to explain to him. He said he had no sin, and I was trying to explain to him how he does, how God looks at his life, and he got mad. He got up and shoved his chair back and he said, okay, that's enough. Get out of here, I got work to do. He didn't want to hear that there was sin in his life. Some Christians don't know they have sin in their life until they read some of the, they read some Bible, they read some Scripture, and find out, hey, I'm not exactly 100% right with God. I got to clean myself up. The New Testament and the Old Testament is full of warnings to believers to stay pure, to stay clean, to stay righteous, to be obedient. The Bible is full of that, not just for the unbelievers, but it's for the believers also. So, warnings to the unbelievers about their sin, warnings to Christians about their sin, and warning to the world in general that there's coming a day of judgment. People say, what's this world coming to? Coming to judgment. It's coming. So, turn to the book of Malachi. Let's jump in there. We're going to read several passages. Then we'll go back and make some comments on stuff. But Malachi chapter 2, we'll start there and drop down there to verse 17. Let's see, yeah. Verse 17, we'll read that first, and then we'll get some more here. Okay, Malachi chapter 2, verse 17. The prophet of the Lord says this to the people. Ye have wearied the Lord with your words. Yet ye say, wherein have we wearied him? What does that wearied mean? It means to wear somebody out. You know, like somebody says, hey, I'm tired of talking to you. We're done. Well, that's what the prophet Malachi is saying to the people, to God's people. He says, ye have wearied the Lord with your words. And yet you say, wherein have we wearied him? have we wearied the Lord? And then the prophet answers. He says, when you say these things. Now listen to this now. How have we wearied the Lord? And the prophet says, when you say, everyone that doeth evil is good in the sight of the Lord. Now wait a minute. We know that's not right. Everyone that doeth good everyone that doeth evil is good in the sight of the Lord. Of course, that's not right. But the people were saying that, and people say it today. Where is God? How come He don't punish? Hey, the other day, I was listening to a radio talk show. It's the American Center for Law and Justice. It's a Christian law firm. They handle cases that are brought up against Christian people. Prayer in school. You know, my daughter was in school and she was reading her Bible, and the teacher come by and slammed her Bible shut and said, "You can't read that on school property." You know, things like that. The American Center for Law and Justice, a Christian law firm, stands up for Christian rights. Okay. They have a period of time in that radio program where people call in and they make comments on things. This guy calls in. He calls in. He says, "First of all, let me say, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. And I'll tell you why I don't believe in God. How can God," we've all heard this stuff. How can a so-called loving God allow brutal, innocent people be brutally murdered, and war and disease and famine? That's the loving God? That's what this guy said. Well, the commentator or the moderator, he didn't really. He said, "Well, we're not